arrive, Bree will set them up, and I would invite you to, at any time, sneak over and get a treat for yourself when they do arrive. So, first of all, welcome to our first community chat about PFAS. We hope to have several of these for this year. This is our very first, and I'm so excited to see all of you here. The format for tonight is going to be, we're going to have a casual discussion among the panelists, and after each person makes comments, I'm going to invite you to ask questions. I also invite you to raise your hand at any time, and I will call on you when we have a bit of a not rude moment for that person while they're speaking. Today's specific topic is how communities will pay for the infrastructure we need to remove PFAS from drinking water. And as we know, all water and sewer utilities are different sizes, and the communities they serve are drastically different in size, socioeconomic diversity, and in many other ways. And so we're joined today by three people who I'm really excited to have, and I want to thank you all for coming. So first we have Stephen Winters, he's our Deputy Executive Director at OWASA, and we have Jean Swam, who is here from Southern Environmental Law Center, where she's a senior attorney. And we have Shadia Escaf, who's the Director of Water Infrastructure for the state of North Carolina. So welcome and thank you all for being here. We brought this group together to start this, what we want to be a really well-informed community discussion about PFAS. The idea of having experts on these topics here with us is to make sure that these conversations start with the right information, accurate information, and then go from you out into the communities. Stephen, I'm hoping you can start us off by talking a little bit about our options for funding our water treatment project for PFAS and the challenges OWASA is facing for the funding.
Sure. So I thought I'd start with kind of setting some perspective about who we are and how we operate, and I'll be quick. We're, I'd say, a medium-sized utility. We've got 22,000 customer accounts, and we serve about 85,000 people throughout the community. Most of our customers are residents, only about 10% are businesses, but that 10% brings in about 2/3 of our revenue. Our largest customer by far is the university, and that includes the healthcare facilities. OWASA is a standalone entity. We're not part of either of the towns or the county. We're not, don't have the authority to levy taxes, and we don't receive tax money either on our own, or we don't receive any money actually from either of the municipalities or the county. Over the years, OWASA's, the community has done a tremendous job of conservation. In fact, the community is using today the same amount of water that it used back in 1990, so almost 35 years ago. Over that 35 years, the number of customers we serve is almost doubled. So again, tremendous conservation success story, and there's a lot of benefits to that. It has allowed us to delay expanding the raw water sources that we use. It's also allowed us to delay the treatment capacity of our plants, but there's a catch to it. If we're not selling any more water, then we're not bringing any more revenue in unless we raise rates. And you know what costs have done over the last 35 years. They've gone up tremendously. So there's the catch, the pressure it puts on the fees we charge for services. So PFAS, as research shows, is harmful to humans. The EPA has instituted limits that all water utilities have to meet in their drinking water. And unfortunately, OWASA has PFAS in our source water. So the good news is, currently, we've tweaked our processes, our treatment processes over the last several months or 6 months or so, and we are right now meeting EPA's limits. But we're confident that's not going to be sufficient for the long term, which is going to require us to invest in new technology, new processes. And it's very, very expensive. We expect to spend over the next 4 years $75 million on this new technology and all to help us remove PFAS from our drinking water. Again, for perspective, that's over half of what we're going to spend on fixing everything else in the system. It's the largest project dollar-wise that we've done, so it's significant. And again, the only money we get to pay for these things is from customers.
Thank you, Stephen, and I just offer this opportunity if anyone has questions about what Stephen said. Otherwise, we'll keep moving, and you can still still raise your hand at any time. Yes, sir.
What opportunities are there for federal funding? I know there's like the Infrastructure Act and
Yes.
are there any opportunities there to help cover these expenses?
Yeah, Shadi, do you wanna?
I'll come to that when I open,
Okay.
and then I can ask you more detailed questions.
Thank you. So I'll first move to SELC's work. Jean, you've got a pretty interesting perspective because you work right here in our community, but you're also working all over the southeast for PFAS removal from the environment. Can you talk a little bit about challenges in this arena and also stories you're hearing from communities that you're working with about facing costly PFAS cleanup?
Yeah, of course. First of all, I want to thank you all for having me. And you know, I want to thank you all for having me. You know, I think it's hard to be in a meeting like this because you know, it absolutely should not be on you all to pay for treatment to have clean drinking water. This is a basic right that everyone should have. You know, we should be able to trust what comes out of our tap water, comes out of our faucets, and trust that that water is clean. And it shouldn't be on you all to have to spend, you know, hundreds of dollars extra each year to have clean drinking water. And I know that that monthly payment isn't going to come lightly to a lot of families. And that's why a lot of what we worked on is to put the burden back on polluters who are using and manufacturing and profiting off of these chemicals. I know that comes as cold comfort for you all who are facing hikes in increases in your bills. Yeah, that's the work that we've been focused on. Is we started doing this work with Chemours, the Chemours facility down in Fayetteville, North Carolina, when folks in Wilmington, and now it turns out that whole section of the state have discovered that they were drinking PFAS contaminated water in the hundreds of thousands parts per trillion for 40 years, and that work really, I think, emphasized the importance of making sure that polluters are the ones that should be telling the public and telling our agencies when they are really releasing these chemicals into our drinking water sources and our rivers, and they should be the ones paying to treat this water. So I wish we weren't in this situation where it's falling on drinking water utilities and community members to pay for this. But we are going to continue to do the work moving forward to try to shift that burden onto industry. In this situation, with OWASA, this the scientists at EPA determined that a lot of the contamination comes from the city of Burlington's wastewater treatment plant sludge or biosolids, and that's because industries sent their waste to the city of Burlington's wastewater plant for decades, and that city of Burlington couldn't remove toxic chemicals from that industrial waste. And we've been working with the city of Burlington under litigation, but they've been a good partner so far, and have worked with us to identify their industry responsible that was releasing almost 11 million parts per trillion of PFAS, and that was passing straight through into the effluent and into the sludge that was then spread on fields near OWASA's drinking water reservoir. So that's why that OWASA is now dealing with this today, and it shouldn't be on this, and I can talk more about kind of just the challenges that that come with fighting against the polluters that are releasing this stuff. And if you all want to hear about where you can direct some of that, if you all want to be involved in that, I have some ideas, but we can talk about that later. Want to make sure you all get to your question.
Yes, sir.
I think this is a very cost-effective way of trying to solve the problem. I've read that the Hall River Assembly has brought suit against Burlington and perhaps some of their industries.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard that they've reached a consent agreement under which the discharge of PFAS into our thing would be substantially reduced. So that's a huge win. Is that correct?
Right, yeah, so we at Southern Environmental Law Center, we represented Hall River Assembly in in both litigation against the city of Greensboro for their 1,4 dioxin pollution, and then, and then notices of intent to sue the city of Burlington for their PFAS pollution.
Well, good for you, because that's a huge win.
Yeah, thank you.
So, I think there could be more farmers need that. Right now, the North Carolina State Water Quality Agency is trying to adopt some new rules
Yes.
that would do just what you said. It would force industries and municipal wastewater plants to greatly reduce their discharge of PFAS into the environment. And right now, they're being held up by opposition from some members of the Environmental Management Commission, which I mentioned is now 100% Republican majority. And also the State Chamber of Commerce is opposing this. But something, I don't know, Stephen, I think OWASA could contact its members in the General Assembly and urge them, point out to them how important it would be to move ahead with this legislation. Because that would really cut down the source of PFAS and dioxin coming downstream. It doesn't directly affect you, but it's just a very important, cost-effective way to kind of reduce this problem.
Thank you, sir. Shadi?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just curious what percentage of the PFAS is coming from industry and what is coming from consumers? Because we're all putting PFAS back into the wastewater.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we've done a lot of sampling at different treatment plants that are dealing with domestic waste, and the domestic waste, is turned out to be around in the 100, 200 parts per trillion, and then the industry, Elevate, now Burlington Finishing, is releasing 11 million parts per trillion. So a lot of times I think the industry and the legislature and the state will say things like, well, this is a ubiquitous problem, we can't really resolve this because it's in our clothing, it's in our, rain jackets, it's in when you wash your pans, and so therefore we're gonna throw our hands in the air, and really that's a red herring because the industrial sources of PFAS just absolutely do not compare to your domestic waste.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Jean before we move on? Thank you. So Shadi, thanks again for being here, and can you tell us a little bit about Division of Water Infrastructure and what you guys do for the state?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm Shadi Eska, I'm the Director of the Division of Water Infrastructure. We're part of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Start off by saying I'm not one of the regulating, so the divisions that regulate PFAS, if you have questions about the science and the regulations and the standards, or a question about standards, I'll do the best I can, but I'm not the expert on that. Our division is the funding division. We're the ones that do provide federal and state funding to utilities to address all sorts of infrastructure needs as well as finance needs. So our division of water infrastructure administers low interest loans and grants to public water systems and wastewater systems across the state, as well as some storm power projects. And we fund local governments, OWASA, other types of utilities for any kind of infrastructure projects, aging infrastructure or replacing lead service lines, emerging contaminants, which is what we are doing. If you hear me say emerging contaminants, I'm talking about PFAS, because North Carolina has focused the emerging contaminants funding for PFAS specifically. So we do have low interest loans and grants to administer and to provide as support to utilities looking to treat PFAS and to remove PFAS from either wastewater or from drinking water. Typically we would we have funds that we would award in a revolving loan program where some of it can be forgiven. So it looks like part of it looks like a grant, part of it looks like a loan. And we have usually about $160 to $170 million a year available for drinking water projects and about $200-ish million a year for wastewater projects. A lot of that funding is coming from the federal government. A lot of it is the revolving nature. So we loan out funds, and then those projects are closed, and the utilities pay us back the principal and interest. We then loan those funds out to more projects later on. So over time, our funding program grows, and we're able to provide more assistance. With the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that was a federal act that passed in November 2021. That's the big $1 trillion infrastructure bill that Congress passed and President Biden signed. That included funding for water and wastewater systems. A lot of it went to just supplement what exists for all sorts of needs, with additional focus on serving disadvantaged communities. And then they were also created 2 separate programs, one for lead service lines specifically to identify and replace lead service lines, and one specifically for emerging contaminants. We're using that emerging contaminants funding to address PFAS in North Carolina. So in addition to our normal funding programs, we also have exclusive funding for PFAS. It's not a lot of money. And that's one of the key things is that we have 5 years worth of about $20 million a year that we can get for that exclusive money. So compared to our normal funding program, this is much smaller. And the needs in North Carolina far exceed the funding that we have. So our job in the division and with the state water infrastructure authority is to determine how to spread that money amongst utilities. I'll pause here, see if there are any questions at the moment. There's much more detail we can get into on funding.
Questions or comments for Shadi? We'll keep moving then. Thank you so much. So the recent funding that's come down from the Biden administration to help communities remove PFAS from drinking water, what are some of the criteria you guys have for helping communities secure the funding? And I think you already said, is there enough to go around?
I'll start with the first one, what are the criteria? So any public water system can apply, and I'll just focus on water right now. Wastewater is similar, but let's talk about water. Any public water system, such as OWASA, can apply for our funding programs if they're owned and run by local governments, OWASA being one of them. And we have an application process. Twice a year, we take applications for funding. And there's the State Water Infrastructure Authority, which is an independent body, independent of DEQ, independent of any political bodies. It's a separate authority. They're mandated to come up with a prioritization system of how to award these funds, how to split the funds that we have in North Carolina. So there's a priority rating system that's been established by SWIA. PFAS projects are highly prioritized, so just to start off with that. But there are other types of projects as well that are prioritized. Aging infrastructure, you heard Stephen mention earlier that there's other types of projects that we have to fund. So there's an application process. We take the applications and we review them, score them according to the rating system, and then we present it to SWIA. SWIA then makes the awards, makes the decisions. Lately, applications have far exceeded the available funding. So the funding we have is highly competitive. So even, we talk about $170 million a year for drinking water. Sounds like a lot of money, but when we get total of about $3 billion worth of funding requests every funding cycle, it's not a lot of money. So the criteria that are being used is the project purpose, the types of projects are, certain types of projects are prioritized, the benefits that come out of it. If it's protecting public health, if it's protecting the environment, those are the 2 main criteria that will prioritize projects over others. And then affordability, the ability for the utility to, we're trying to spread the funds, especially the grant funds, to those systems in the state that need the funding assistance the most. So there are criteria that the applicants follow through the application process and identify what they can qualify for. The disadvantaged, trying to provide assistance to, I'm not sure I like that term, but that's the term that EPA uses, and it's what's in the federal laws. They call it disadvantaged communities. So funding, a portion of the funding needs to be made available to disadvantaged communities in the form of principal forgiveness, which is like a grant. To qualify for that, the local government or the utility needs to be in an area that is disadvantaged or more disadvantaged than other areas, or serving a subset of a community that is disadvantaged. So those types of projects get priority points and get additional subsidies with their funding. As far as funding needs, as I mentioned, we've had funding rounds where we have $3 billion worth of applications, and that was even before PFAS was on a lot of systems' minds. Lately, the past 2 or 3 funding rounds, the projects that, for drinking water projects that actually received awards were PFAS, had a lot of PFAS, because again, those are highly prioritized at this time. I expect that to continue the need and the applications for funding is only gonna increase, when it comes to addressing PFAS. And we're trying to stretch the dollars that we have as much as we can, but we need more. The state needs more, DEQ needs more to be able to award to the systems that need it.
Any questions or comments?
Question?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I would assume Chapel Hill doesn't qualify as disadvantaged, so what relief would OWASA be able to expect from, this funding?
Sure. So OWASA as a whole may not qualify as, and I don't remember, because of these, we look at census data every year, so that changes, so potentially, but I'm not sure. I mean, I think last round's OWASA as a whole would not qualify as a whole as a disadvantage. But if OWASA was to fund a project that is focused on disadvantaged areas within the service boundary, they can qualify, utility can qualify for the regular funding. The PFAS funding is available for all local government-owned public utilities. So OWASA doesn't have to show that they qualify as disadvantaged to get some of the PFAS exclusive money. But again, that's only $20 million a year that we have that we can award. So, we have caps. We only can fund $500,000 for studies. So if any utility has PFAS and they want to study their options and come up with a design for how they're going to address it, they can apply for up to $500,000. You don't have to be disadvantaged to get that, and that's grant-like money. And up to $5 million of construction. So if they're doing any kind of treatment, Stephen mentioned $75 million. If OWASA is to apply and they're only getting this money, they get $5 million towards the $75 million. So again, the money is limited.
Yeah, what other municipal water systems have PFAS that needs to be removed? Or maybe alternately, which ones do not?
Can I rephrase this question just a bit? How many public utilities are there, and what percentage of them have PFAS? And of those, what are low, which ones are low income? Do you mind if I rephrase it that way?
I can try to answer both of those. So it's, I can say there are several, I don't know the exact number, how many municipalities, there are several. It's not just this area here, and we're seeing it across the state. I think there are about 300 public water systems that have PFAS that exceed the standards, federal standards right now. There are about 2,000 community water systems. To answer the second question, about 2,000 community water systems. That includes a lot of small privately owned systems. There are about, I would say, I'm guessing about 500 or so municipal owned or local government owned utilities. How many of those have PFAS exceeding, how many don't? I don't know, but I know there's about 300 or so water systems, including privately owned water systems, that exceed the federal standards. I don't know, Gene, if you have any more data on that.
I don't, but I think DEQ has compiled that. I can look that up and send it to Katie to distribute. That would be helpful.
Thank you, Jane. Any other questions?
Yeah, do the private water systems qualify for state funding?
For our funding programs, only local government-owned utilities, nonprofit water corporations, which basically are nonprofit water systems, and investor-owned utilities that are regulated by the Utilities Commission. So like Aqua North Carolina or Carolina Water Service, they can qualify for the drinking water safe revolving funds. They can't qualify for the wastewater funds, but the drinking water can. But small individual privately owned systems like a mobile home park or a homeowner association would not qualify for our funding programs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for Shadi before we keep moving? Okay, so Jean, would you mind telling us a little bit about what's next for SELC in your fight to get PFAS cleaned up? To the extent that you can talk about it.
Absolutely. I think one of our audience members knows a lot about what's going on with PFAS, and one thing that's been coming up in the news some recently is that our state is trying to get PFAS water quality standards passed at the North Carolina Environmental Management Commission, and facing a lot of resistance from industry lobbyists, including the Chamber of Commerce. I think that, that's happened because our legislature passed a law that took over appointments at the Environmental Management Commission. And they did that knowing that it would block rulemaking that would help protect us from toxic chemicals. So we are working on the fight at the Environmental Management Commission and doing what we can to support getting water quality standards through. And that's important because those are what our state would use to limit industrial discharges of PFAS into our drinking water sources and our rivers. At the same time, our state does have existing authority to control industrial discharges of PFAS. They can do so under authority that they have under the Clean Water Act, which is why we've been able to litigate and bring these cases, and we're continuing to put the pressure on them for that. And there are opportunities to engage as members of the public for that process. When an industry applies for a permit to discharge their waste into our drinking water sources or our rivers, that permit, when DEQ issues a draft permit, it goes out for public comment. And then at that point, organizations like Haw River Assembly will tell the community that, hey, there's a permit out for public comment. You all can just write letters about the ways that industrial PFAS pollution has been harming you and your families, or you can show up at public hearings. And that's one way that we encourage community members to get involved, because it helps for the state to know that, I mean, honestly, we don't care if they're held up, water quality standards are being held up at the EMC, and that we need to see action now to be taken to protect our drinking water sources and our rivers. And so that's our fight right now. We're doing it one permit at a time. Right now, the permit that's on DEQ's desk is for the Lear Corporation, which is on the coast, which is a little bit removed from you all, but it does affect a lot of people that are downstream of Comores facility. And so they, have been exposed to 40 years of PFAS pollution and don't want to suffer from additional pollution from other industrial sources. So, we are working to support those members and making sure that permit is protected, because there really should be limits on that permit to force that industry to treat their waste.
Any questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering how much in general, what's the percentage of sewage sludge plays in the percentage of the pollution that maybe Wassa has or these other utilities have?
That's a great question. I don't think we have the data on that, but sewage sludge is notorious for having, toxic chemicals that haven't been adequately treated, and PFAS is a huge problem in sewage sludge, especially sewage sludge that is, industrially impacted, where industries have just been sending their waste to these treatment plants, and that sewage sludge has been spread on farm fields throughout the country, really. And I think, one place where this has really come to a head is in Maine, because they have had dairy farms throughout the state where they realized all of their milk had concentrations of PFAS that were absolutely toxic and not okay to sell, and so all these dairy farms have been having to close down. And Maine then banned the land application of sludge, and that was a direct result of just the state recognizing how much harm sewage sludge can cause.
What did you find in the case of Wassa then?
Owassa's water has been impacted directly by sewage sludge from Burlington's treatment plant. So we didn't calculate percentages, but where we found, where you sample along the tributaries where that sludge has been sampled, there are no other sources, and you can sample along those tributaries, and you'll find PFAS right where all the sewage sludge has been land applied or sprayed for years. And this affects our food, where where crops are planted in those areas. It affects drinking water wells, because a lot of times the sewage sludge is sprayed near drinking water wells. That's one of our cases in Georgia right now. It can cause tremendous harm. And
I'm sorry.
oh, I was just gonna say, PFAS, stick around in the environment for decades. it's really, once it's out there, it's really hard to remove, so that's why we need to do what we can to keep it out of the environment in the first place.
Since we're about halfway through and we did get the refreshments delivered, I wanted to give everybody 2 minutes. If you need to grab a drink or a snack, you're welcome to do that right now. If you wanna wait until the end, please take something with you. Is everybody good? Okay, everyone's shy. Okay, thank you, Chief. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to ask an extension question off of yours. I'm curious what
Can you
progress.
speak up a little bit?
Yeah, I'm curious what progress OWASA has made at halting land application of treated sewage sludge around Cane Creek and other important input areas for OWASA's drinking water. So I feel like that could go a long way.
Yeah, so it has stopped.
Okay.
What we're talking about here has not happened for,
Since I think 2017.
yeah,
For
2017, since 2017.
Great.
No applications on any water
Right.
tributaries that are feeding into Cane Creek or anything?
Correct.
That includes from Burlington as well.
Yes.
So where does, the sewage sludge go?
I don't know.
I don't know,
Wausau's?
it result,
Oh, I know where it
I'm
was.
sorry, I'm Todd Taylor, I'm executive director for WASA. We had some conversations once we first started identifying that could be a potential source. We had conversations with the city of Burlington, and they ceased, applying on those fields. But I'm assuming that they have other fields, in other areas, but they ceased the, applications in the Cane Creek watershed.
So where does the Wausau's go then?
We have different places. There's some in Alamance County, where our biosolids go.
We have application sites in Chatham County, and Alamance County, Orange County. But we do not apply within the Cane Creek or University Lake watersheds.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on that before we keep moving? Okay, so Stephen, how do you expect, cost for PFAS treatment, how do you expect it to affect ratepayers? And if we're not able to secure supplemental funding, what is that gonna look like for the community?
Sure, don't let me not come back to that, but I wanted to add something. We are part of what's called a multi-district lawsuit. It's kind of like a class action lawsuit against some PFAS manufacturers. The lawsuit has settled with a couple of them. I don't remember all the parties involved. I think DuPont is one. So we do expect to get some money from that. We don't know when that might come, and we don't know how much. What we do know is it won't be nearly, enough to cover our costs. Probably shouldn't guess, but I'm guessing it's way less than 10 million. Probably less than, I don't know what, I don't really know, I shouldn't guess. How it will affect our customers. So our board of directors just recently approved our budget for the coming year. And in that budget, it was included a 15% increase in the rates that we charge customers for monthly water and sewer services. And that kind of, if you recall my opening comments as to, why that is. So absent any federal or state funding or funding from some other source that we've not yet identified, the ratepayers are our only source to cover our costs. We do anticipate having additional rate increases over the next several years. We don't think they're going to be 15%, in the single digits. And as always, we do everything we can to reduce that impact. But yeah, the costs come along with rate increases.
Thank you, Stephen. Sumaira? Yes, ma'am.
Just to follow up on that, so what percent of the rate increase this year was attributable to anything to do with PFAS?
Yeah, good question. Question is how much of the rate increase was attributable to PFAS, and it's close to half.
Really?
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments on that? Okay, so Shadi, your division's facing a lot of challenges in determining how to award these funds for PFAS treatment. What are some of your priorities in this process, and what are your concerns moving forward?
Okay, thank you. So you heard me say this, that the funding that we have is too limited to the entire state, and that's number one concern, the number one challenge that we have. make best use of the funding that we have available, but we need more. And I'll keep saying that, we need more funding. What we're doing right now is I want to make sure, one of the things I want to make sure that happen is that the utilities that find that they have PFAS know that we have funding available now. And now is the time to apply for the funding. Because the emerging contaminants that exclusive funding for PFAS will run out in about 3 to 4 years' time. So apply now and don't wait. And reaching out and letting everybody know, if those that have PFAS in their drinking water that are eligible to apply, letting them know that we have this funding available to apply. So that's one of the things that we're trying to prioritize. The other thing too is to try to prioritize making the funding available and equitable and fair, and try to spread them so that funds are made available, and continue to prioritize PFAS in our regular funding programs, so that we're supplementing this small exclusive funding that we have with all of our other funding programs. That's what we're doing right now. We'll continue to do so. We have, in addition to our regular funding programs, an opportunity with a separate federal grant program with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. They created a separate program for emerging contaminants for small and disadvantaged communities that's outside of everything I talked about. That does allow the use of these funds to also help the small privately owned systems. I mentioned earlier, that's why bringing it up. The small privately owned systems can't apply for our funding programs, but the separate pot of money could be used for some of those systems as well. We know there are a lot of small systems and a lot of schools that have PFAS in their drinking water. They can't apply for our funding programs, but this other separate pot of money could be used in that case. So we're trying to prioritize doing that. You heard a lot from Gene about that the cost burden should not be falling on ratepayers to address PFAS. The Secretary of DEQ has said the same thing, and that's also DEQ's stance is that the residents should not bear the full cost of addressing PFAS. The people that are putting PFAS into the environment should also pay their share. And we've been trying to do that, and that goes outside of what my division does, but that is what DEQ is also trying to do. So that's one of the challenges, one of the next steps is try to set standards for PFAS that go beyond the drinking water system, so to help the drinking water system and customers with it. So I think I'll pause here, but if there are questions about applications and funding that's available, happy to answer those. Also have some, if you are interested, we have application training, so those that are interested to apply, especially local governments. I have flyers here to pass out.
And just before we go to the next, well, besides us, if anybody's wondering, we have applied, and we'll continue.
I can't comment on that, yes.
Kim?
I was just curious, as you've definitely illustrated, there's not enough money to go around. That 20 million special PFAS pot, how are you prioritizing to best stretch it out? You mentioned studies, and that's certainly a need for a lot of systems. But then moving beyond that to actual treatment, I mean, as Stephen said, OWASA is looking at 75 million. That's just one medium-sized system. So how are you prioritizing that much too small pot?
So the prioritization for the PFAS specific funding is slightly different than for our regular funding programs. For the PFAS specific funding, we're reserving half of that $20 million that we get each year to help systems study their options and come up with their solutions. Because in some situations, you may find a cluster of systems nearby, and it doesn't make sense for every one system to have a treatment system if they can have one and share. So we want to prioritize studies in systems that have PFAS. So we reserve up to half of the money to do those kinds of studies. And if there's not enough demand for it, then the funding can be made available for what we call construction projects. So if you are putting in treatments, that money is available. So half the money is available already for construction, and if not all the study reserve is used, the rest of it goes towards treatment as well. But for our other funding program, which is where we have the vast majority of funding available to help systems, the prioritization there is across the board. It's not just studies, it is for construction projects. Actually, those score a little higher. in the rating systems than studies. If a project is focused exclusively on addressing PFAS, those score very, very high in our rating systems as well. A project doesn't have to be 100% focused on PFAS to apply. We've had applications where a system is applying to rehab their water treatment system and add a GAC system, granule activated carbon, I picked the hardest one, system to treat PFAS as well, and those get benefit from us as well. So we prioritize any kind of treatments to address PFAS, especially those systems that have PFAS above the federal standards right now, for our funding programs as well.
Okay, I'd like to get into the technology a little bit. All I have heard anyone talk about is activated charcoal for removal. And I don't know if you want to talk about some of the problems with activated charcoal. It's a good absorbent, but it's too general, and so it picks up everything, and so its capacity stinks if you're talking about its ability to pick up PFAS. There are other technologies coming along. Are you guys plugged into that?
So I think
Can I
we're-
interject too?
Sure.
So, this is our first PFAS community chat. Just so happens the next one that's being planned is exclusively focused on technology, so we can address that some. I'll let Stephen talk to that, but stay tuned. And we'll dive deep into that at
Do you
the
have a
next
date
one.
for that?
And it'll be end of July, and we'll post it on our website.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna leave with.
Okay, good.
Because I can't go into that, but what I will say, two quick things. What we're going through right now is a study of what would work best for our system, because what one works for one doesn't necessarily work for another. I'd like to say that yes, we are plugged into those, emerging technologies. Whether they'll work out for us or not remains to be seen. And the second thing is, there's a lot of questions, and rightfully so, about the qualification process, but remember, he said $20 million a year, which is, not very much money at all, given the need. And for the study, we've applied for, I believe it's $500,000, right?
Yeah.
What's available. So while it's important, and any money we can get will help, and it'll go to relieve pressure on rates, just need to keep it in perspective, we're not talking about much.
Yes.
So if the rules came out in April, and you told us in the start that it's going to be 75 million, but you're still doing the study, how do you know that it's going to be 75 million?
It's a educated guess at this point. It could be drastically different than that, but that's the information we have right now.
And I've seen applications for that much. We've had applications coming in for $75 million, so this is not, that range is not unusual.
Yes, sir.
You had mentioned that you applied, and he was mentioning that there were criteria that prioritize which ones who apply get the money. So how did you pitch OWASA's needs to get prioritization?
There's other folks fill the application out, so I won't be able to go into detail, but it's pretty formulaic. They ask questions and we answer, we respond to them, so it's not like we're writing an essay.
Okay.
Yeah, I can clarify a little bit too. So our application process, in order to apply, again, the rating system's already been established. It's pretty standard and objective. Are you doing a project that's gonna do this? Yes or no? And if so, show us documentation that you are going to do this. So part of the application process is that the applicants look at what the rating system is, how we want to score them, and they're specifically addressing each line. It's kind of like applying for a grant too. We're academics, a lot of academics here, so if the university is applying for grants, same process. You have a very specific scoring system, and you're showing that you're meeting those objectives. That's how OWASA and everybody else apply to our programs. We score them based on, are you doing these things or not?
And in the back.
Yeah, I was just wondering if OWASA possibly had any concerns that they may be too far ahead of the curve, and potentially not pilot testing certain technologies that maybe should be looked at.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think there is concern there. However, we're on a very strict timeline. We've got to have this in place in 29, I believe. Yeah. And so we've got, our schedule for getting this done is pretty tight. We're gonna finish up the study in this coming fiscal year, so like in a year from now, we should know what the solution is, and then it's gonna be hustling to get it constructed.
Any other questions or, yes, sir.
In terms of the studies you've been talking about funding, it sounds like you're studying how to treat the problem, but how much is that money, if any of it, is going to identifying the sources of the problem so that you can kind of, stop the hangover before you get the hangover and try to treat the hangover?
Really good question. Again, the most cost-effective process is to eliminate the discharge, the source. The funding programs that we're administering are specifically for public water systems and wastewater systems to address their needs, and it can't be used to identify, it's just the way that the act was enacted and what Congress had made the funding available, we can't use it to identify sources. Can't even be used for those systems to test and see whether or not they have PFAS. It can only be used for those that already know they have PFAS to find out what the solutions are. So pilot testing, I heard looking at emerging treatment technologies, things like that, that can all be studied with our study grants. But to use our funding to go and locate where the sources are is not going to allow the expense under the federal rules.
I'd like to just add on to that to localize it to Owasso. One of the issues, yes, everyone would love to go, you turn off the spigot to the PFAS and we don't have to worry about it anymore. However, our spigot got turned off in 2017. We've been monitoring ever since. We've seen no reduction in PFAS in our raw water sources in that time period. It's the persistent nature of these. Once the fields were contaminated with it, we're going to be living with that for a very long time. Treatment is our only option. And then I hate to jump ahead, but from technology standpoint, you have to remember that anything that we submit to the state has to be approved, and there are currently only 3 methods for treating PFAS that are approved. So all of the emerging technologies and everything like that, I think are going to come to the party way too late for it to have an impact on our planning going forward. I just thought it might help.
And those three acceptable approaches are?
Yes, granulated activated carbon, ion exchange, and reverse osmosis.
Thank you, Todd, that was
I was just thinking, just throw out there that if you were able to identify the source, that might allow the lawyers to go after responsible parties.
Right. Well, on that note, the city of Burlington is our responsible party, is our direct, for lack of a better word, polluter. And unfortunately, they could still be out there spraying on our fields, and it's perfectly acceptable under the law right now. So that's unfortunately, that wouldn't bear much fruit for us to.
We would disagree as to
Yeah.
whether that's
Well, if you could
acceptable
go,
under the
who's
law.
putting it into wastewater to begin with, and then just follow it up.
Yeah. But about identifying sources, the Clean Water Act also requires, so in order to discharge your wastewater into a river or drinking water source, you have to apply for a permit. The Clean Water Act requires that you disclose what pollutants you put into those waters. And really, the way that should work is that should put the burden on the leaders that, they are the ones who have the best information about what chemicals they are using, and they should know what's in their discharges. They're the ones that should be putting in their permit applications, what they're releasing. I think DEQ has gone halfway there, and they've sent out some questionnaires and they say, if you have done any sampling, will you give that information to us? But they aren't asking industry to proactively sample so that, that I think they aren't using the full extent of their power to identify sources, and so we're having to rely on scientists and, you know, agency folks to just go out and sample here, and, you know, it hasn't been, the way that we've been finding sources has not been efficient and is not the correct reading of the law, obviously we are litigating, but, you know, we can't sue every single industry in the whole state, so, yeah.
Thank you, Jean. And lady in the back in the green shirt, I missed you
Yeah.
earlier.
It's a little bit of a side question. I'm curious, of our adjacent counties, Durham, Alamance, Chatham, are all of the adjacent counties dealing with PFAS issues as we are in Orange County?
There are sources in other counties, I think, I have not worked as much in them, but Alamance County, Harbor Assembly has just been finding some drinking water wells with 3,000 parts per trillion in private wells, and so they're definitely, you know, this has been a problem that's built up for a long time, and unfortunately, a lot of the suffering falls on people who, you know, have been drinking water for their water thinking that it's clean for many years, only to find out that, you know.
Is Durham County dealing, do you know? I'm just curious how special we are in this region.
So PFAS is not in one particular area in the state. It's in many places, in the mountains, in the East Coast, in Piedmont. Whether or not Durham itself or Durham County, I don't know off the top of my head. I don't remember them having applied for funding. That's the only way I would know if they would have it. So I'm sorry that I don't have an answer for you.
Okay,
Some river basins do have more PFAS contamination than others, and Durham draws more from the Neuse, which not is as contaminated as the Cape Fear when it comes to PFAS.
And I think Jean was saying earlier that DEQ does have a map with some information about different systems across the state that have voluntarily reported their data, is that right?
Yes, and EPA does too. It's not super user friendly, it's called the PFAS analytic tool, but it has some sampling.
Well, and anybody can ask DEQ. I'm not the right person, but there are others in DEQ who can answer that question. I'm happy to connect you with folks.
There are a lot of well water in around Cane Creek. Have those private wells been tested, and what is being done to help those homeowners or residents?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's been many years since they've been tested. You know, we've been focusing on trying to turn off the tap in Burlington, but that's a good question that I will follow up on.
That area is growing rapidly.
Yeah. The back wall?
Yeah, I just had a related question to that, because I know the Drinking Water Act doesn't cover private wells, so there's no requirement to test them. And I'm curious, I know it wouldn't be in this particular pot of funding, but is there any conversation that you all know of that's happening about testing wells, as she was noting, or even maybe expanding service boundaries to areas that are known to be polluted? Is that something that would be on the table in this type of situation?
I can talk about the funding part of it. So if a community has homes on individual wells that have PFAS, if they've tested and the wells show PFAS, and there's a willing utility nearby to extend and connect those homes and get them off of the wells to be part of the utility's customer base, that is allowable. We've had applications for that, and that could be used even for the PFAS specific funding as well, to extend lines and get people off of individual wells. The applicant, though, is not the homeowner, the applicant is the utility. So, so there's that. As far as any requirements for, again, it goes beyond me, I think that's more of a Department of Health and Human Services question in DEQ, because they regulate, or they're the ones that focus on individual wells. So I don't know if I can answer the question about requiring sampling. I don't know of any requirements to sample except when you're putting in a new well, or if there's something wrong with your system with the water well.
Yes, sir.
We've been talking some about what a staggering cost it's going to be to control PFAS. So part of that is the capital cost of building the facility. But as I understand it, it's a big operational cost too that continues. And so that's an every year cost that's gonna keep going. And as I understand it, the more PFAS that comes down into the treatment plant, the higher that operating cost is. So I really think it would behoove OWASA to make sure that, you know where the PFAS is coming from in the watershed. It's clear that these sewage sludge fields that are unfortunately just upstream from Cane Creek are a major source. And I can think of some possible ways that that source could be mitigated. Whether they are cost effective and practical, I'm not sure, but I think it's worth it. I could reel off a small list, I won't do it right now. But I think it's worth looking for the most cost effective solution. Another thing I think that should be a high priority for OWASA is to do some strategic monitoring around the watershed, just to see if there are other significant sources. And if they are, you know, we should try to keep them from growing and figure out how they might be mitigated. But it would only take a few strategic samples on, you know, it's a small watershed. All the tributaries, if you find a tributary that has no PFAS, you don't need to go any further. If you find PFAS in an upstream tributary, you can take another couple of samples and see where it's coming from. But if there's any way to mitigate some of the PFAS coming in, that might be very cost effective.
Yeah, like Shadi said, that's the, you know, would be the ideal.
Yeah.
Just don't know the feasibility of it.
We'll take a look.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just curious if OWASA or DEQ, the extent of which y'all are working with researchers at UNC, NC State, all of the academic resources we have who are doing a lot of statewide testing, the collaboratory, and things like that can sort of be leveraged to answer some of these questions where there's not necessarily money, but there are expertise and mass specs that can be run to do these targeted, non-targeted analyses.
So I spoke before and I didn't introduce myself. I'm Mary Tiger. I'm the Director of Community Relations for OWASA. And we do participate with collaboratory research. We've actually had a pilot project at our Jones Ferry Water Treatment Plant with the collaboratory UNC, the NC Pure project. So they've been testing novel sorbents. So we absolutely participate in that. We have been funding research in PFAS for years. We're a part of the North Carolina Urban Water Consortium, which has done a lot of funding of UNC, NC State, UNC Charlotte, researchers across the state that are doing research in PFAS. So absolutely, that's really important to us.
Thank you, Mary T.
I'll add on the DQ side.
Good evening, patrons. The time is now 7:30 and the library will be closing in 30 minutes at 8 o'clock. Again, the time is 7:30 and the library will be closing in 30 minutes at 8 o'clock.
Okay, we'll make this quick. So yeah, DEQ is also engaging with academics who are focusing on PFAS on a wide variety. We have them working on a lot of research for the department. That's how we're doing a lot of the analyses that is going towards the Science Advisory Board and the Environmental Management Commission. So there's a lot of work that is happening, and DEQ is engaged at the executive level. So the secretary and the secretary's team is working directly with those researchers.
So in the interest of getting everyone to one time, we'll take one more question, and then if you have any questions for us as you walk out, we'll stay for a few minutes after that. Yes, sir.
I heard these technologies that were approved, and that just seems to dovetail nicely with home systems, that when you look at the technologies they use, it's the same one. Are there any thoughts about if that would be an adequate response by a homeowner until this comes on board and online with OWASA?
Yeah, we have some information on our website for homeowners to access and gives them some ideas about how to, if they want to do something in their home, what they can do.
So those technologies are adequate that home systems use that would be as good or better than
I don't think we can say that.
OWASA? Can you rate that, is it good enough, or what?
I would say that we don't do any sort of testing. We can point you in the right direction to resources where they have, you know, they can tell you what brands, those kinds of things are effective, but we don't do any testing in-house. One of the things we always caution homeowners on these filter systems is they do require maintenance, and it is very important to stay on top of that maintenance, because you can actually cause more harm if you're using a system that's, you know, favorable. You know, just taking the water without the filtration system, so we're always very cautious about that. But yes, if you look on our website, it points you to the authorities on, you know, the systems.
Home water filters,
and
yeah.
folks that have tested them and those kinds of things.
Okay.
Okay, well, in the interest of getting everyone home, I'm gonna say thank you all for coming. Yes, thanks to all of you for your very thoughtful questions and for your interest in this topic. And again, please keep an eye on our website. We'll post when we have a date for our next chat, and we'll have a couple more this year and hopefully more after that. And if you haven't given us your email address and you want our quarterly newsletter, just quarterly, not too much, please leave us that, and please fill out a survey, because we will use those to shape how we do this in the future, and your input's super valuable. Anything else? Okay, thank you guys so much for coming. And please take refreshments on your way out.
If you need a pen, I have extra pens as well.
Thank you guys so much.